Got to find the answer to the question. Somebody, come on, somebody, will you help me find the question? Got to find the answer to the question. Somebody, come on, somebody, will you help me find that? What is the price of happiness? How can I
Oh, bleak.
got to find the answer to the question. Somebody, come on, somebody, will you help me find the question?
Bit too much sugar there? I suppose you could even call that a heap of sugar. No one puts a heap of sugar on their cereal.
What is the price of happiness? How can
I mean, it's still a heap of sugar. I suppose removing a few granules of sugar isn't going to make it not a heap of sugar.
somebody, come on, somebody,
How can I eat a healthy breakfast?
got to find the answer to
Oh!
somebody, come on, somebody, will you help me find that? What is the price of happiness? How can I find the true love? I need to find the question. Got to find the answer to the question. Somebody, come on, somebody,
A nice, healthy, non-heap-like addition of sugar to my brekkie.
somebody, come on, somebody.
Wait a second. 1 granule of sugar is not a heap. Removing 1 granule of sugar cannot reduce the heap of sugar to a non-heap. Surely then removing 2 granules of sugar will not reduce the heap to a non-heap. And by that logic, removing 3 granules of sugar cannot make a heap a non-heap. So, removing 23,651 granules of sugar does not make a heap of sugar a non-heap. So, removing 90,768 granules of sugar does not make a heap of sugar a non-heap, leaving me with 1 granule left. But that would mean a granule of sugar is a heap of sugar? Poor. Oh, God. What's going on? What's going on?
Bonjour, Rory. I see you've had your first encounter with the paradox of the heap. Don't you worry. I remember when I had my first paradox meltdown as well.
Yeah, this is really freaking me out.
If you need some paradox therapy, you can always make yourself some vegan peanut butter cookies. And maybe share some with Aristotle.
How do I solve this paradox?
All right, mon chéri, let's begin. Sorites' reasoning depends upon the understanding that vagueness is tolerated. Making small changes doesn't change the applicability of a word. If a table is a table, it will still be a table even after we remove 1 molecule.
So, the paradox exists because small changes seem insignificant, but many small changes put together make one big significant change.
Parfait, exactement. Alors, in this paradox, we see a modus ponens argument. If 100,000 grains are a heap, then so are 999,999 grains, and so on. As with any paradox, we have 3 possible responses to consider. A, accept the conclusion of the argument. B, reject the reasoning as faulty, or C, reject one or more premises.
But how can we accept the conclusion?
Peter Unger argued in favor of this, but even he recognized that there were better solutions to the Sorites paradox. Let's see about solution B. Initially, it doesn't make much sense. Sorites' reasoning is extremely simple and uses the fundamental logic principle of modus ponens. Yet, the degrees of truth solution proposes that there might be something wrong with this principle of reasoning. It states that true sentences like, I am sitting down, have the maximum degree of truth 1. A false sentence like, I have blue eyes, has the minimum degree of truth 0. Borderline cases such as, this table is brown, are registered by intermediate degrees of truth. The general idea is that if the antecedent of a conditional is truer than its consequent, then the conditional cannot be wholly true.
So if the borderline for a heap begins at 100 granules of sugar, then the statement, this 95 granule collection is a heap, is truer than this 94 granule collection is a heap.
Oui.
I'm not convinced. What about C?
Rejecting the premises is employed by the epistemic theory of vagueness. The theory argues that the conclusion that there are no heaps is simply false, yet the reasoning is valid, so one of the premises must be false.
But how can one dispute the first premise?
You can't, it's true. It's a generalization put forward by the second premise that must be false. The principle of tolerance says, if an n-grained collection can make a heap, then so can an n-1 grain collection. The epistemic view argues that vagueness is nothing but ignorance, and thus holds that the heaps and non-heaps are separated by a sharp line, and that we cannot, even in principle, know where this boundary lies.
Ah, I've read about this one. I like this one.
But if such boundaries exist, how can we be unable to determine them?
One proposed reason is the fact that it is constitutive of vagueness that the unspoken boundary can shift depending on the context and interests of the speaker. When trying to discover where the boundary lies, our very investigation causes the boundary to shift by changing the context of the conversation, and so the boundary is never where we are looking for. For example, if I stated that I was tall, and you then tried to investigate where the boundary of tallness lied, your very action of investigating would shift the boundary from what I originally meant. Therefore, I can maintain bivalence through maintaining that there are in fact sharp boundaries in vague terms, but we can just never know them. Whilst the degree theorist has to explain why we should reject classical logic with premises that are nearly true, yet a conclusion that is wholly false.
But this can be done. We just have to deny the validity of modus ponens for this paradox. What degree theory suggests is actually consistent with what's widely believed about modus ponens. There are two reasons for this. First, modus ponens is normally applied to cases that are completely true or completely false. And this is in sync with what degree theory says. Second, it is not correct to assume that an argument's validity is properly understood in terms of preservation of degree of truth. This is to say that the conclusion of a valid argument must have a degree of truth no lower that of the least true premise. Perhaps it's preferable to state that the conclusion of a valid argument cannot have a greater degree of falsehood than the sum of the degree of falsehood of its premises.
So degree theorists argue that vagueness is semantic, a matter of meaning.
Precisely. We want to believe what is true, but we do not always know what is true. Less than total confidence springing from incomplete evidence of or fear of unreliability mirrors our epistemic deficiencies. But less than complete confidence springing from an appreciation of vagueness does not.
In that case, shouldn't a degree theorist first refute the epistemic theory?
Well, oui.
And how would they accomplish that?
Je ne sais pas. That's above my pay grade.